The Switch 2 Direct was yesterday, and we are already learning so much more about this system. There's just been a deluge of information, both from Nintendo disclosing on different websites, as well as people now having hands-on experience with the system. And I'm gonna do my best to try and get through as much new stuff as we've learned, some of which I'm not the biggest fan of. There is some other news that I think is pretty good as well, though. I do want to start, though, by actually doing a tiny bit of catch-up, because when I did my direct reactions video, there's actually two things I forgot to mention. One of which is actually really cool, and another thing that's not that great, but we have gotten some updates on that make it not quite as painful. First off, game sharing. I cannot believe I forgot to talk about game sharing, because this is actually one of the things they showed that I am so happy to see a return of. This is effectively a new version of what they did on the 3DS with Download Play, where in a local multiplayer situation where you have multiple people all having their own Switch or Switch 2, if one person has a copy of certain game share compatible games, that's all you need in order to do local multiplayer. Not every single person needs to own a copy. That one person's copy is enough for everyone to be able to play all together in a local multiplayer situation. On top of that, they even clarified that you can take those local groups and still interact with online situations. So if you are getting a group together for, say, an online competitive team-based game, you can be together locally, have all your Switches ready to go to play that game, and then take it to an online match just off the one cart. Super awesome feature. Obviously, we need to see how it actually works in practice once the system releases, but there's not really a downside to a concept like this. It's just cool. Now, the other thing I forgot to talk about that is a little more very eye-rolly, is the concept of Switch 2 Tour. This is the effectively tech demo game that was announced that, showcases all the Switch 2 features and little ways you can do things, and for some reason it is a sold separately paid for game. And this isn't like 1-2 Switch where they, tried marketing it as its own standalone party game that just happened to also showcase a lot of the motion controls. This is very clearly a tech demo focused game that you have to pay for if you want it. Now, since finding out about this, we have now at least gotten a general idea of what the pricing for it is going to be. We don't have US pricing, but we do know that in Japan it's being listed for 990 yen, which roughly translates to about $6. So they're not asking a lot for it. They're not going for $20. They're not going for, a nicer indie game price or a full game price, but it is still very bizarre to have people pay for it up front. If it ends up being like $5 for the US, that's low enough where I could definitely see some people picking it up just to try it out, but I'm very curious how well this game is going to actually sell for Nintendo, because it seems like such a odd thing to charge for. Now, as for some brand new stuff that we've learned or been clarified, the first thing I want to touch on is pricing, because this is something that I think is getting pretty mixed reactions from a lot of people, and I understand why. It's because of the fact that MSRP prices for Switch 2 games are a little scattered at the moment, with some games being listed for $70, which has been the standardized price we're seeing more often on stuff like Xbox and PlayStation. It's how much they charge for Tears of the Kingdom, but some games now also going as high as $80. And it seems like the logic for which games are 80 and which are 70 follows the logic depending on if this is a Switch 2 edition game, or if it's something that Nintendo, feels like is a bigger prestige title. For instance, Donkey Kong is only $70, while Mario Kart World is $80, presumably because Nintendo thinks that's a bigger title in some form. Meanwhile, for Switch 2 edition games, it seems like they're latching onto the fact that those games were $60 normally, $70 in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, and are bumping the price up by $10 or $20 depending on what kind of content is being added in the Switch 2 edition. So for instance, Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a $60 game that is now going to be $80 because the Switch 2 edition upgrade added new content along with the performance increases. Meanwhile, the Legend of Zelda titles are both $10 more, $70 for Breath of the Wild and $80 for Tears of the Kingdom, because those games are just getting visual enhancements and nothing else. There's a consistent internal logic to why they are charging $80 for some games. It's just not great. One other thing worth bringing up is that specifically in the case of the Legend of Zelda upgrades, both of those are actually going to be free as part of Nintendo Switch Online. Presumably you need to keep having an active subscription to enjoy them. But if those are games that you were looking forward to trying the upgraded versions of, and you weren't sure about paying for the upgrade fee or even rebuying it potentially physically, that's going to be something that you get free as part of NSO. So that's a nice little boost. It'd be cool if more of them were listed under there. It'll be interesting to see how many different games get added over time as part of that benefit. Next up, another frustrating thing is the concept of game key games. These are specific Switch 2 titles where you can buy a physical copy, but it doesn't actually have the game on it. It is a blank cart, essentially, that allows you to then download the data for those games involved. There's only a small handful that we know are going to be following this right now, specifically the Bravely Default Remaster, Elden Ring, and Street Fighter 6, which comes with all the later on DLC. I think in Street Fighter 6's case, it sounds like the core game will be a part of the card, and then it's all the later DLC that you have to download. But in the case of something like Bravely Default, yeah, you're just downloading the game and the cart is more or less symbolic. It's interesting because this is definitely better than, say, having a game code inside of a box, because of the game code, you're connecting it to your account and it's just stuck with you. You can't lend it to someone, at least not normally. You can't resell it. Whereas with these cards, it does sound like it's always going to use the cart itself as a check. So yes, the game isn't actually on the cart and you have to download stuff, but you could rehome that game if you wanted to, lending it to someone, reselling, whatever. So it beats having like a code in a box, but it's still a really weird thing to see, and it's frustrating in cases where it feels like it might not be necessary, right? Because for instance, Cyberpunk 2077, that's entirely on cart because they chose to go with the higher storage carts for it, whereas Bravely Default is, for some reason, not taking that route and requiring you to download the information instead. It also doesn't help that the box art for these games is honestly just not great looking. The same applies too, by the way, to Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, where even in the cases of upcoming ones like Metroid Prime 4, they just put a whole giant paragraph on the front of the box being like, by the way, this includes the regular version of the game plus Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades. And it's stuff that I wish was just on the back of the box and didn't make the front cover a mess. In the case of game key games, it's making it very loud and clear that the full game is not present on the cart and that you do have to actually download and install, and it lets you know the amount of information as well. On the one hand, I guess it's cool that it is warning you away and making it very clear that it's a game key game, but if you're a physical collector and you like having, nice cases altogether, again, this is kind of a weird situation where it's not truly a physical copy of the game because it's kind of just a representative cart that lets you download stuff. But it does kind of suck that the box art for those just does not look as good. Now, as for some good news we learned since the Direct, alongside the games that are getting paid for upgrades for Nintendo Switch 2 editions, there are also a whole bunch of games that are going to be getting free updates for the Switch 2 specifically. So in those cases, we're probably not going to see them get the kind of massive upgrade that some of those Switch 2 edition games are getting, but they are going to be seeing improved performance and better visuals on the Switch 2, whether that's uncapping the frame rate or putting it at least at a higher cap, allowing it to reach a higher resolution than it was capable of on the regular Switch. And the list of games currently confirmed to be offering this right now are ARMS, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Super Mario Odyssey, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, Clubhouse Games, Link's Awakening, Echoes of Wisdom, Game Builder Garage, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and Big Brain Academy Brain vs. Brain. Of the games on that list, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is definitely the one that I am most excited to see what it's actually going to look like, because that game just does not run well on the Switch, and Game Freak had talked before about fixing that, and it never really got fixed, so hopefully it looks a lot better on Switch 2. I will say one franchise that I hope to see get added to this that we just haven't heard any talk about yet is Xenoblade. Particularly, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 absolutely did have some performance issues on the Switch. It was the first game they put on it, so it makes sense, and they did a better job with optimization for every title after. But it'd be great to see that whole franchise get an additional upgrade on the Switch 2, either as Switch 2 Edition re-releases or just the free patch, which I think would actually be preferable for those. One really cool piece of news, and this is actually one of the most recent things we've learned, this was this morning, we have gotten confirmation that yes, DLSS and Ray Tracing are going to be present on the system. We don't really know to what capacity because it is one of those things where it comes down to how devs want to leverage these features, so we're going to have to wait and see how it actually works out in practice, but it is good to know that these are things the Switch 2 is capable of taking advantage of. We just don't know to what full extent or how well it's going to work until we really see it in action. Interesting, not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, but I just think interesting additional things we've learned. In Japan, there's actually a unique Japan-only version of the Switch 2 that is being sold at a considerably lower price point. Basically, in Japan, there are two versions of the Switch 2 that can be purchased. There is a worldwide version, which is meant to be the same as all of the ones you can buy buy elsewhere that's running for 70,000 yen. I'm rounding up a little bit there. While the Japan-only version is being sold for 50,000 yen, which is a pretty significant discount. I think that roughly works out to being about $340, so quite a good discount there, except those particular Switches are only going to be able to access the Japanese eShop. They're only going to run Japanese versions of games. Basically, it looks like Nintendo is trying to ensure a way that people within their own home country are able to get the system at a cheaper, more affordable price, but not encourage people to suddenly try and mass import that version of the system because it's so much cheaper. Instead, you would have to grab that worldwide version. Next, when it comes to pre-ordering the Switch in the US, there's a very interesting additional restriction going on, at least when ordering from Nintendo directly, that I personally think is kind of cool. I understand why the wording is a little scary to some folks, but basically, if you are trying to pre-order directly from Nintendo, they're going to be prioritizing people who have paid for Nintendo Switch Online at some point and have had at least 50 hours worth of gameplay on the system. I realize that sounds a little weird because it's like, oh, people that have paid more money for Nintendo have an easier way of pre-ordering. The real purpose of this, trying to curtail scalping of the system. They don't want people to just make multiple accounts if there's a limit one per customer and just order a whole bunch to then flip around and sell for double the price. They're trying to ensure that everyone pre-ordering a system from Nintendo directly are actual people who have owned original Switches and have put time into them. It is a little rough for situations where you want to grab multiple because, say, you want one for yourself and then buy one for a kid or another family member. You're still able to pick up systems from other retailers, but from Nintendo specifically, there is going to be that limitation. We've also learned the pre-order date for the Switch 2, at least in the US, is going to be April 9th. So for all retailers, for Nintendo, for Best Buy, Amazon, whoever, April 9th is when they're going to be putting the system up, the games up, the accessories, all kinds of stuff. So that's the day you want to be ready to set up your pre-order if it's something you want to grab right away at launch. As part of these pre-orders going live, we've also gotten a chance to learn about a whole bunch of accessories that are going to be going on sale right away. Some stuff is obvious or we already kind of knew about, like the Switch Pro controller, which we now have a price for, which is $80. Buying additional Joy-Cons, a replacement dock, which is going to be $110. We know the camera is going to be priced at $50 now, which, by the way, there's the official Nintendo one, and Hori has actually revealed their own competing option, which who knows how that's going to perform in terms of like how well the camera looks compared to the official Nintendo option, but the camera itself looks like a piranha plant, and that is genius. But as far as other new accessories go, we also know that as a first-party option, you're going to be able to buy a carrying case for the Switch, a charge grip for the new Joy-Cons, and I think most interestingly, some new wheel peripherals to use with the Joy-Cons for, of course, playing Mario Kart World. And then speaking of accessories, one other cool piece of news we've learned is that all previous first-party Switch accessories are going to work with the Switch 2, at least wirelessly. Obviously, you cannot take a Switch 1 Joy-Con and attach it to the Switch 2's body because it's a different connecting mechanism, but you can use those Joy-Cons wirelessly with the system, and the same applies for the current Switch Pro controller. So if you have those controllers and you don't want to have to buy a brand new one, you don't necessarily care about the updates like getting a C button, well, great news, you can still use them with the system. In the case of Joy-Cons, you're just gonna have to find another way to charge them since they can't attach to the main body. What's not a big upgrade are some other things we've learned, like the battery life and the UI. Now, we've heard some general talk about them wanting to improve the eShop experience on the Switch 2, which hopefully that does run a lot better because the eShop on the Switch, not great. But one thing we have seen is the home screen for the Switch 2, which, at least for me, is a negative. Looks pretty much the same as the Switch. It is different. They've added like a new bottom bar for some immediate access things like wanting to open up the social stuff or go to your system settings, but the general concept is very similar to the current Switch, where it's this very bare bones clean look where you have the lineup of your games. I was really hoping to see something with a little bit more personality, a more significant shift, and that just is not the case. Technically, seeing this very simple home screen design does not rule out the possibility of things like having themes, and that's something I hope to see still happen, but as far as just the kind of basic design of the Switch 2 UI, they're playing it very safe. Another thing that's not so great, battery life. I'm not that surprised about this, but it does still make it a little rough to find out. Because the Switch 2 is very similar in size to the current Switch, but also a lot more demanding power-wise, battery life on it, not great. The Nintendo estimation for it is 2 to 6.5 hours, depending on what kind of games you're playing, and it takes 3 hours to charge the system back up while it's in sleep mode. not a ton of time. As someone who primarily plays games in handheld mode, that's going to be rough. I'm definitely going to have to play it in Game Gear mode a lot, where I just have it plugged into a nearby wall all the time as much as possible. The runtime on it is like just enough to be able to play it in spurts when you're on the go, but definitely not a extremely portable solution at battery life like that. Hopefully this is one of the things where when we eventually get some kind of revision, we see that number go up, because that is not a ton of battery life. Something else we've learned that hopefully will get better with time, the list of games that are having problems with backwards compatibility. I was hoping this was going to be a situation where it was a very small number of specific games because of some particular feature, like not having the IR sensor, but Nintendo has actually released 2 full PDFs listing a bunch of games that are having problems in back compat on the Switch 2 right now. Either games that are having trouble starting up at all, or those games that do start up, but then have problems running. Something that's really funny about both these lists, by the way, is how there's a little notes section for what the current status is, and almost every single one just says currently under investigation, which hopefully means there are things that'll get fixed by the time the system fully releases. The one exception that doesn't say that is Fortnite, where it says that a Switch 2 version is being released. So it sounds like they're kind of just like not worrying about Fortnite until the Switch 2 version comes out. Hopefully that's a launch day release so people can just play it right away. But if you love Fortnite and you're planning on getting a Switch 2, there is a possibility that you're not going to be able to play it immediately if that Switch 2 version is not ready at launch, because apparently the Switch 1 version doesn't play nice with the Switch 2. There's actually quite a few games in total on both these lists. I'm not going to try to work my way through all of them, but it is a lot more than I thought we would see or was hoping to see. I'll have those linked down below in the description, so if you want to see for yourself what games are on there and which ones to be aware of. Again, hopefully though, because these are under investigation, they are things that can be fixed before the system releases. One last thing I almost forgot to mention, we did also learn about a whole bunch of other Amiibo that are being released alongside the Switch 2. We are getting 5 more Legend of Zelda Amiibo that are based on the Sages from Tears of the Kingdom. 4 of them will be ready at launch for the Switch 2, with another one coming out further down the line. All in all, a lot of extra information. There's definitely some stuff that has impacted the hype a little bit. People seeing the general total price of getting into the Switch 2 is adding up pretty quickly, with games being more expensive, along with the system having a higher initial price point than I think a lot of people were hoping to see. On top of that, stuff like Game Key, the number of games that are having backwards compatibility issues currently, definitely some stuff that is knocking the wind out of the sails, I think, for a few people. But I still think there's an overall pretty strong push for the system in general. There are things that are certainly going to get yelled about, but I think the general hype level for Switch 2 is still pretty high. At the end of the day, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Mario Kart World, and a whole bunch of other games that were shown off look fantastic, and I think are going to be a ton of fun to play. Obviously, we're just gonna have to wait and see until it actually releases to know how good those games are. But a lot of the early impressions that are coming out today have been pretty damn positive. So I'm gonna keep trying to just drop as much coverage I can of this system as we learn more. There's just constant information dropping back to back and back, and there's other things that I want to do a little bit more of a deep dive on. So if you want to see those videos, make sure to subscribe. I might even just be going daily for the next few days because there is so much going on. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, and until next time, I will see you all later.